Hello, everyone. We're just giving folks a few minutes to log in before we begin our webinar. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you all for finding the time and attending today's global webinar. During today's webinar, David Coleman, Director of Product Marketing, will be discussing Wireless Intrusion Prevention System, or WIPS, not just another security RFP checkbox. You might think WIPS is just another checkbox activity because Wi-Fi security has been enhanced, but we encourage you to think again. Why? The bad guys are always looking for a sneaky way to access the corporate network through holes in the access layer. As IoT adoption grows, more than 11 million new devices that connect to the internet each day are wireless, giving Wi-Fi pirates and other bad actors a whole new field of opportunity to play in. During this session, we will cover why wireless and Wi-Fi are often easy points of entry for bad guys, why you should put WIPS back at the forefront of your enterprise security strategy, and how putting WIPS in the cloud strengthens and simplifies security. A couple of items before we begin. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them at any time using the Q&A button on your screen. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and available to you in the next 24 hours. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to David. David, the floor is all yours.
Thanks very much, Mitch. And I want to thank everybody for joining us here today for this session. Once again, another online session as opposed to in person. I promise you one of these days, it'll all be back to normal and we'll be seeing each other in person again. But for now, another webinar, and that's okay because we can make these fun and interesting as well. So as Mitch mentioned, the topic today is wireless intrusion prevention systems, WIPS, not just another security RFP checkbox. So who am I? If you don't know me, my name is David Coleman. I am the Director of Product Marketing at Extreme Networks. Certified wireless network expert number 4, and there is my Twitter address at Mr. Multipath, which is my fun Twitter name. A lot of people usually laugh at me about that, but the Wi-Fi community is actually very active on Twitter. So I encourage you to follow myself as well as other key players in the Wi-Fi and security industries. Now, with that, I'm also the co-author of this big fat book about wireless security called the Certified Wireless Security Professional Study Guide from Checkbox Publishing. Now, it is a study guide for a test on Wi-Fi security, but it's also a reference guide, and that's what I think most people use it for, including myself, to go back and remind myself about wireless security mechanisms and how they work. My co-author and I, when we wrote this, we dedicated 4 chapters specifically to the topic of today. And the topic of today is wireless attacks and WIPS. So even though this book is actually 4 years old, a lot of these wireless attacks we're going to be talking about today have been around for a long time, but you should understand that new threats are developing as well. Wi-Fi has been around for about 20 years, and very shortly after, wireless intrusion prevention systems debuted as well. Now, that being said, over the years, especially I would say in the past maybe 5 to even 8 years, but let's just say 5. Over the years, WIPS, the intrusion detection solutions, have taken a back seat because everybody seems to think of them as a Me Too RFP checkbox only. In other words, what I mean is Maybe you're getting ready to buy a new wireless solution, and security is part of your strategy, obviously. But when you're choosing between vendors, you just say, oh, yep, they have a WIPS, check. And so everybody just has one, and everybody does. But you're going to hear me say this multiple times during the presentation, not all WIPS are created equally. There's best of breed, and then there are the RFP checkbox WIPS solutions. Now, why has it become kind of this, nobody seems to really think about WIPS that much anymore? A couple of reasons. To be quite honest, WIPS solutions in the past have often been cost prohibitive. We're going to talk about that and how that's changing. Secondly, Wi-Fi security's gotten better. It's just gotten better over the years. In the early days of Wi-Fi, all the way back to 2005 and so, Wi-Fi was completely insecure. Then WPA2 came around, and now we have WPA3. So wireless has definitely gotten a lot secure, but that doesn't mean that a lot of these attacks still shouldn't be monitored anymore. They still exist. And as I mentioned, new attacks are developing, especially on the IoT front. We're going to talk about that because any wireless IoT device now is a potential hole into your corporate background. Now, as I jump into the slides in this presentation, we're going to talk about WIPS both historically and also architecturally. And historically, believe it or not, we owe WIPS, the development of the very first WIPS solution was a direct reaction to what is known as the rogue access point. Okay, so I have some scary music and a scary icon for a WIPS AP, skull and crossbones with antennas sticking out of its head. So why is it so scary? Well, you should be scared. Because it is, wireless is an access layer technology, and a rogue AP is simply any unauthorized wireless device that is plugged into your network that might be acting as a portal into your corporate network. So let's just talk about this historically. In the early days of Wi-Fi, not only did it have security problems, but the rogue APs was the first thing that popped into the enterprise as a potential wireless threat. Now, what I mean by that is there's an old term called, a concept called the consumerization of IT. And that means that when new technology comes out, people use it at their homes before it is actually deployed in enterprise networks. And what happens is the consumers like that technology, they usually bring it into the enterprise and force the enterprise to deal with it. That's exactly what happened with Wi-Fi years ago. There wasn't a lot of corporate Wi-Fi solutions, even as many as 15 years ago or 18 years ago. Somebody at their house had a Linksys. They liked the Linksys. They had the mobility and the wireless at their house. They loved it. They went to their IT administrator and said, I want Wi-Fi at work. And their IT administrator said, no way. I hear that Wi-Fi stuff's not secure. And at the time, it probably wasn't. So the employee got denied. But you know what? They just turned around, went home, bought another Linksys device or D-Link, came into work, plugged it in, and boom, they had instant Wi-Fi. Now, they didn't realize the consequences of their actions. They effectively ignored their network administrator. But there you had a rogue AP. And most rogue APs aren't put in by bad guys. They're put in by employees not realizing the consequences of their actions. So that is why you need to control and manage your wireless network. And rogue APs, once again, historically forced us to deal with this. They brought Wi-Fi into the enterprise. People decided, IT administrators realized the importance of having Wi-Fi and that it would actually be beneficial for their for their employees. And additionally, that also gave birth to the development of WIPS solutions that can monitor and detect rogue access points. Now, once you're in the enterprise, you need to manage your own network. Always remember that Wi-Fi is an access technology, and it's And it's a portal into your infrastructure, and it's your job to guard that portal. And the best way to do that is with 802.1x. So you have an 802.1x authorized client, and then you have APs that are under your management that are 802.1x authorized access points that are going to in turn talk to an 802.1x infrastructure with Radius and LDAP. Now, the whole point is within an 802.1x authorization framework is to authenticate and validate the credentials of that client. Once that's been validated within that 802.1x infrastructure and framework, the AP opens up its controlled port, and then the client's authorized at layer 2 and gets authenticated, gets an IP address, and then can get onto the corporate network. And that's what it is. You are managing your network with a strong authorization and authentication solution. But if you don't have wired side protection in place, and that is becoming more common, thank goodness, but if you don't, anybody can plug in a rogue access point. It could be like a D-Link, for example, or any kind of thing that you can buy off the shelf at your local department store. And an employee might connect with a client. They're effectively unauthorized, and then they have an unauthorized wireless portal into your entire backbone. You know, in the early days of WIPS, a lot of companies deployed WIPS solutions before they deployed Wi-Fi, because they were so worried about the rogue APs. Okay, now that's forced us to, but as I said, this has become WIPS and Wi-Fi deployment obviously has become very commonplace. Now, that being said, that has forced changes in the industry over the years. So let's talk about why WIPS architecture and how it has changed over the years. So currently the model that everybody is using right now is an integrated model. And what I mean by that is you have some sort of network management server platform that has your WIPS built into it, or it could be a controller that has the WIPS solution built into it. And then the APs are the sensor devices now. So it's not an overlay solution, but the APs are part-time sensors, and they take advantage of the fact that the APs already do some sort of adaptive RF off-channel scanning for making adjustments for radio resource management purposes. And while they're doing the off-time scanning, channel scanning, they're also listening for potential attacks, but they are part-time listening devices. Now, any vendor can also turn these into full-time sensors, but most people don't, because they don't want to have the added expense of having a dedicated AP acting simply as a sensor. And that's kind of why the overlay model has kind of not as popular as it used to be. The overlay model was the original model for WIPS solutions, where you had a wireless network in place, or maybe you didn't, but you had a wireless network in place, and then you had a whole overlay WIPS solution put in place with a WIPS server, with the sensors, dedicated sensors that had to be hung in the ceiling up to as effectively listening devices that scan both the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz band. Now, the downside to this, it was the cost. It was the cost of the extra hardware and the cost of man hours of actually deploying the extra sensors as well. But keep in mind, these were full-time sensors. Now, when we talk about full-time sensor placement, let's just talk a little bit about full-time sensors a little bit more. There was always what we call ratios, sensor to AP ratios. So maybe if you have 20 APs, for example, what's the correct ratio for the amount of listening devices you need to have? So in this case, I have 4 sensors that are full-time listening devices. So, and the reason, and basically I'm dedicating 1 sensor, WIPS sensor for every 5 APs. And that's pretty common. We might recommend 1 to 4. It depends on the vertical too. Sometimes you get into federal government and military Department of Defense, they want a ratio of 1 to 2. Okay, so it really depends on what you're trying to monitor it, but it also kind of brings me to my point about what is better, full-time sensors or part-time sensors. And I will make the argument that the full-time sensors that have been a part of the old model, an old architecture of an overlay strategy, is much more effective than the part-time sensors. So once again, if you have an integrated WIPS architecture that function as part-time sensors, they're doing off-channel scanning procedures for dynamic RF spectrum management purposes. So for an example, a vendor might have an AP spend 10 seconds on its home channel. And then it'll go to another channel and listen for 110 milliseconds for the RF environment, and also may detect any potential attacks during that time in a very slight time slice listening mode. And that's basically what's happening here. Effectively, you're providing time slicing between AP and sensor functionality. But what's the main functionality and the main purpose here? The main purpose is to serve as clients. It's not for security monitoring. And that's why I'll make the argument that a full-time sensor is always going to be a lot better. As a matter of fact, the analogy I've always used is this one. Just go back to what I just said about 10 minutes on, or excuse me, 10 minutes or 10 seconds on channel and 110 milliseconds off channel. So would you hire a security guard to watch the main entrance of your place of business and want the security guard to take a break on every hour for 55 minutes and only watch the main gate for 5 minutes every hour? But that's effectively what you're doing with part-time sensors that are in integrated WIPS solutions. You have a security guard that basically works for 5 minutes every hour. So that gives 50 minutes for potential attacks to occur. Another reason that part-time sensing is not a good idea, it's not optimal, I should say, is if you are deploying voice over Wi-Fi. So voice over Wi-Fi is very often negatively impacted by when an AP leaves its channel as a part-time sensor. So what most vendors have in place is if based on the QoS mechanisms and the detection of a voice call going through an access point, it suspends the off-channel scanning. So if you have an active network where there's a voice-grade network where there's a lot of voice calls going on, you have no security monitoring. And that's another problem with the part-time scanning. So with that, let's move on. Okay, so how can we deal with this? So I mentioned, you can always have the full-time sensors with an overlay solution, but almost everybody's moved away from that because it's cost prohibitive. So once again, what you could do is, once again, turn one of your radios into a sensor. So let's talk about the differences between dual frequency and dual 5 gigahertz. So with dual frequency means every vendor has an AP that has a fixed 5 gigahertz radio. So for example, in this case, we have a fixed 5 gigahertz radio on channel 36, and we have a fixed 2.4 gigahertz radio on channel 6, okay? Now, I think we all know in indoor and high density deployments these days, in most cases, you're turning off 2 out of every 3 2.4 gigahertz radios because 2.4 gigahertz is considered a best effort band. Still got to provide the coverage, but we want most people to go to find devices to go to 5 gigahertz. So there's always a mode to disable that radio, okay? And that's fine. But what most vendors will recommend is, if they're smart, is instead of doing that, is turn it into a full-time sensor. And that way, 2 out of every 3 of your 2.4 gigahertz radios are monitoring. But here's the problem. The problem is it's a 2.4 radio and it's only listening on the 2.4 band. You do not, so basically maybe you've enhanced the capabilities for your 2.4 gigahertz listening by having some more full-time sensors, okay, by converting that radio to, but the 5 gigahertz are still part-time sensors. Now, here at Extreme Networks, we have been a big believer in dual 5 gigahertz technology for a long time. We have a lot of APs that have dual 5 gigahertz technology. So you have a fixed 5 gigahertz radio, this example, one on channel 36. And then we have another one that's a software selectable radio, or sometimes a software definable radio. And it can be either a 2.4 gigahertz radio, or you can convert it either manually or automatically, dynamically, to a second 5 gigahertz radio. Now, this is very popular with our customers because It adds a lot more 5 gigahertz bandwidth with this capability. So maybe 2 out of every 3 of your your software selectable radios are being converted to an extra 5 gigahertz channel. Very popular because you can provide more bandwidth as opposed to just 2.4 gigahertz. Now, the other thing you can also do is that software selectable radio can be a full-time sensor. But in this case, that software selectable radio is a sensor for both bands. So now you still have provided a 5 gigahertz radio coverage. Maybe 1 out of every 3 of your radios is 2.4 gigahertz, and maybe 1 out of every 3 is a secondary 5 gigahertz, and then 1 out of every 3 SSR radios is a full-time sensor. And so that is a creative way to maybe deploy full-time sensor and listening coverage, but all housed in the same access point, and also provide dual 5 gigahertz capabilities at the same time. Now, we have a lot of models that can do this here at Extreme Networks. Here's our the one with the best price point. I love this little guy. It's the AP305C and CX, 2 Wi-Fi interfaces. There are 2x2x2s. One's a fixed 5 gigahertz 2x2x2, and the other one is a software selectable radio that's 2x2x2 that can be 2.4 or 5 gigahertz, or that full-time sensor device that can monitor both bands. And we have many models that are capable of doing this. Now, where this is really going for the higher end APs, and we're not the only vendor that does this, other vendors do this as well, is 3 Wi-Fi interfaces. Now, where we're kind of unique here is we have the AP410C that has dual 5 gigahertz capabilities with, so you have Wi-Fi 1, that's the fixed radio. You have Wi-Fi 0 that can be software selectable, either 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz. These are 4x4x4s. But then we have a third radio. And the third radio is simply a 2x2x2, and it's a full-time listening sensor. That's it. That's its job. It can be used for our spectrum management. It can be used for locationing purpose, and obviously it can be a sensor for WIPS solution as well. So third radios are becoming more and more common. And I'll go back to my original statement about one of the problems with where WIPS is being taken for granted is people haven't been willing to spend the money for the overlay solution. Well, that's this and maybe this in a combination with the dual 5 gigahertz strategy. This is more cost effective, okay? And effectively, if you go with, if you do go with all your APs that have 3 radios, you effectively have a WIPS sensor in every single access point. You have a WIPS sensor housed in every single device. Now, as I mentioned, not all WIPS solutions are created equally. The best, so what I'm going to talk about now is a couple things. I'm going to talk about some more of the wireless attacks that are out there. And I'm going to talk about what I consider should be part of any best of breed WIPS solution. Okay. And are these feature sets. So one is auto classification. So any WIPS solution should be able to identify devices, and based on devices that you have classified devices based on authentication methods, encryption methods, SSID, IP addresses, and auto-classify them as either authorized devices or unauthorized devices. So this helps save a lot of time during proper deployment of your devices. So any AP that's out there with proper security that you have mandated, that you are managing, as long as it meets those requirements, it'll be automatically classified as an authorized device. Anything else that doesn't meet these requirements, it's going to be flagged as a potential threat. So there are WIPS vendors use rogue detection. And once again, the rogue AP has been the #1 threat for many, many years and continues to be. And there's a lot of different ways that rogue detection works. Some are publicly talked about. Most are not, quite frankly. A lot are secret sauce kind of methods that are not revealed so that the bad guys don't know the methods. But there's a combination, in a lot of cases, I can tell you that we actually have multiple methods. Here's one very simplistic method that a lot of vendors use. So you have a rogue AP, it's plugged into a switch, and there's a rogue client connected to it. that rogue AP on the wired side might send some broadcast traffic onto the wired side, like some ARP broadcast traffic. Its wired interface does. That ARP traffic propagates your switch fabric, goes down through your switches, down to the managed APs and or sensor devices, it floods out the ports. And that traffic can be detected on the wired side. And what a vendor can do, like us, is build a wired MAC table, okay, based on the wired address we heard sending out that broadcast traffic. Now that rogue AP is also broadcasting out on the wireless medium, and it's going to have a BSSID, which is the wireless MAC address. And that's going to be detected when scanning with the radios. And then you can build a wireless MAC table. And then it's just a simple comparison. It's a simple comparison of the wireless MAC table to the wired MAC table. And why we do this is most vendors increment those. And if we look at a range of 64 up or 64 down, and basically based on that range, if they're within that range, if we can see a wired and a wireless MAC address within that scope, we can classify it as a rogue because we've identified a device that's sending unauthorized devices sending traffic on the wired and wireless sides. So I said this is just one method, one very simple method. There's some very complex methods as well for rogue detection on the wired side. One thing you should point out that a lot of people miss when deploying WIPS sensors is very often you need to trunk your sensors, including for wired side VLANs. So if you look over there, we have a rogue AP that's plugged into VLAN 200 on the access port of a switch. That might be a wired only VLAN. And it might, but you know what? To detect, depending on the rogue detection method, you may need to also trunk that wired VLAN down to the sensor that is also listening on the wireless side. So bottom line, go with the recommendations of your WIPS vendor. Now, another thing that's been around for a long time is mitigation. And all mitigation is once an unauthorized rogue AP has been detected, you can kill it. You can mitigate it. And all this is using a long, old layer 2 denial service attack that's been around for a long time and turning it into a countermeasure effectively. So you have a rogue AP, you have an associated rogue client connected to that AP, and you have a sensor. Once that rogue AP has been classified as a rogue AP, you can try to effectively de-auth the relationship between the rogue AP and the client. You can kill the connection. And it's done by spoofing MAC addresses. So the sensor will go in an active mode and start sending spoofed management frames, like a deauthentication frame, where you'll note the transmitter address matches the rogue AP's address. And it might be a broadcast. So any clients that hear that think it's coming from the rogue AP and they cut the connection. So effectively, any bad guys cannot get through the rogue AP and onto the network. That's kind of what this is meant to do. Or it could be a unicast. It could be a directed unicast from spoofing both the, it's a unicast to the rogue clients from the sensor, but it's once again spoofing the MAC address of the rogue AP. Some clients might ignore this kind of command. So what we can also do, and this has been around for years, everybody does this, is a spoof client deauth. So bottom line is the sensor can send a deauth from, looks like it's being sourced from the rogue client, and it's going to the rogue AP, and once again, that cuts the connection. Now, a couple of things about mitigation. Number one, we'll talk a little bit more about management frame protection, but management frame protection has rendered some of these old legacy mitigation attacks useless, or mitigation strategies useless, I should say. So what we've done here at Extreme is we now have new ways of performing management rogue mitigation that don't necessarily rely strictly on a deauth frame. And so we can get around the management frame protection, okay, with our mitigation techniques. The other thing is, I always get asked is, well, should I set mitigation to be automatic or should it be a manual thing? It really depends. Technically, if you start mitigating and doing a denial of service on somebody and they're not plugged into your network, technically it's a gray area of the law, and it could be different in different countries. So you only want to be mitigating something that is plugged into your infrastructure. So we do have a lot of customers that use our air defense solution that do have automatic mitigation on, but they trust it. It's accurate enough to do that. But if you're uncomfortable with it, there's nothing wrong with manual mitigation. You get an alert that's a rogue AP, you turn on the manual mitigation and go find the rogue AP, and then you rip it out. There's also ad hoc networks. They haven't been near the threat that they used to be because most devices don't have ad hoc capabilities. But in the old days of Wi-Fi, you had laptops where you could bridge the Wi-Fi card with the wired card, like you see in the diagram over to the right of the screen. And effectively, you turned your laptop into a rogue AP. So ad hoc was considered a really bad thing for security purposes, which is why I recommend if you do have the capability in-house, disable it. We can mitigate ad hoc networks as well. That being said, probably the bigger thing that you're seeing a lot more in ad hocs now are hotspots. So you have like these things where they have hotspots, and effectively you now have people putting Wi-Fi hotspots on their phones, and now you have a gateway to the cellular network. And this is an unauthorized gateway. It's not going to your infrastructure, but it's an unauthorized gateway. And so you see kids and students do that in schools and stuff a lot of times. So the good news is that a good best of breed WIPS can detect and in some cases even mitigate those. Now, that being said, there's lots of other attacks. So one is the layer 2 denial of service attack. So here's the most common one that's been around for ever. And it's actually was the basis of some of the mitigation strategies that we've had, but it's also an attack. And so you have a access point, you have associated clients, and then you have an attacker. And the attacker spoofs that MAC address, and they send out deauthentication frames that make it look like it's coming from the authorized AP, and then the associated clients get knocked off, and that's not a happy day, okay? Now, the good news is that there's management frame protection, and as defined by 802.11w. And management frame protection encrypts part of management frames to protect a lot of us against a lot of these layer 2 denial of service attacks. The bad news is management frame protection has not been implemented very widely in the past. It's just not a lot of clients have supported it, and most people just don't turn it on. That's going to change in the future. And the reason that's going to change in the future is management frame protection is mandated by WPA 3. Now, once again, there's not a lot of tactical deployments above WPA 3. Most people are still using WPA 2, and in most cases, that's fine. But once you implement WPA 3 for any MFP, management frame protection will eliminate some of the bigger layer 2 denial of service attacks. The problem is there's a ton of them. There's literally 200 layer 2 denial of service attacks, and management frame protection will not protect you against all of them, just the biggest and more common ones. So the good news is that we can detect these all the time. I actually had years ago a student invent a layer 2 denial of service attack in class. They took a hex editor, they took a beacon frame, they edited it, they put the channel 0, which doesn't exist in a beacon frame, and started sending that out. And that beacon frame, basically when clients heard that, their drivers couldn't handle it, and they all just went kablooey. So it's just manipulation of management frames can cause a lot of these layer 2 attacks. And the good news is that we can detect them very, very easily. There's also layer 1 attacks, now denial of service attacks. Now, anybody with an RF jammer, now luckily they just don't sell these at your local grocery store, but you can buy anything on the internet, and you can get an RF jammer that can jam a whole band or certain channels in both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. It's illegal to do that. So, by the way, it's a federal crime here in the United States to cause a denial of service either at layer 1 or layer 2, and it probably is in most other countries as well. That being said, anybody could, due to medium contention and due to the listen before talk nature of the RF medium, an RF jammer will force clients to just go silent if it's a consistent transmitter. In reality, most people don't have these. Most RF denial services are due to things that are just like a microwave oven or something. It's an unintentional denial of service. The best of breed WIPS also have spectrum analysis built into them. One of my favorite attacks is this one. It's been around for a long time, and there's a lot of iterations of this, the wireless hijacking attack. So you have and this is done a lot at like hotspots, like maybe you're at Starbucks. You could be susceptible to this attack where there's a lot of open wireless networks. You're on a hotspot SSID, you're connected, but then an attacker brings a laptop that has an evil twin software AP built into the laptop. And they are broadcasting the exact same SSID, but on a different channel. Now they'll use a layer 2 denial of service attack or use a jammer to force you off your original AP, and you'll roam and you'll be connect to the evil twin AP, and you're effectively hijacked at layer 2. The attacker has a DHCP server on its laptop as well, issues you out an IP address, and boom, he has you at layer 2 and layer 3, and then all kinds of bad things can happen. Can perform a man-in-the-middle attack, can route your traffic by routing your traffic back to the original AP, can also do what are known as Wi-Fi phishing attacks. Good news is these attacks can be prevented with proper 802.1x security, but you don't always have that at public hotspots and any good WIPS solution can detect literally the 20 different versions of this attack. You know, the one attack you can't prevent with a good WIPS solution is social engineering. And people are always the weakest link. So I don't care how good a security you have in place and how good a WIPS detection. If people are getting tricked into doing things and social engineering techniques, they'll get into your network. So that's where training is very important. Make sure employees are very well trained to recognize social engineering attacks and to abide by security recommendations. Now, a best of breed WIPS is going to have a good signature analysis. And what I mean by that is signature analysis to analyze frame patterns and changes in patterns. These are known as signatures. Our solution has well over 200. Sadly, a lot of these RFP checkbox WIPS solutions might only have 20 or 30 signature solutions, but we have 200 plus in our solution. So some of these are bigger attacks than others. They all have alarm thresholds that can be adjusted and defined. Another big part of best of breed WIPS capabilities is behavioral analysis. And that is the ability to recognize patterns that deviate from normal wireless LAN activity. So behavioral analysis identifies these abnormal network patterns, anomalies, based on historical metrics. And this is where cloud is going to make WIPS better. Cloud is all about gathering big piles of data. And the more data you can have to analyze, the better your behavioral threat analysis will be. And you'll be able to detect anomalies a lot faster and a lot more accurately. Which brings us to forensic analysis. Okay, WIPS solution, best of breed WIPS solution should also provide forensic analysis that allows an administrator to retrace their actions to any single wireless LAN device down to a single minute. In other words, a timeline, a historical timeline with the ability to rewind and review minute by minute records of connectivity, communication, and possibly anomalies. Okay. Now, one thing I'm very proud of here at Extreme Networks is we announced back last summer in our cloud solution, Extreme Cloud IQ, unlimited data at no extra cost. So in unlimited visibility, and nobody else is doing that with their cloud. So theoretically, as WIPS move forward towards the cloud, you'll be able to do forensic analysis from the day you have your cloud account, and you could go back theoretically years in time. What about auditing? Can you do auditing? The best way to audit a wireless network is to hire a third-party professional, but not everybody's going to be able to afford to do that. So there are tools out there like the Wi-Fi Pineapple and things that will help you do some that are fun. They're meant to be auditing tools, but they're also could be used for malicious purposes as well. That being said, any best-of-breed WIPS is going to have built-in auditing capability and compliance reporting. So based on how you've deployed your network and how you've secured both your wired and wireless network, we can put together very complex reports that'll punch holes in your network, showing where you have some potential holes and what you need to fix. This is also important for a lot of different industry things such as HIPAA and PCI. We have reports that are generated specific around those industries as well for compliance reporting. A best-of-breed web solution should be able to do protocol analysis. Most vendors offer some sort of remote packet capture capability. Should also be tied to your web solution as well. So you can do remote packet capture for the advanced admins and advanced users that really want to dig deep into every little bit. Not just for performance and Wi-Fi troubleshooting, but sometimes wireless security solutions. So a lot of times we think about wireless protocol analysis more about performance and troubleshooting, but it can also be for security purposes as well. And any best of breed WIPS should have some sort of remote packet capture, both in including real time built into its solution. Now, alarms, as I mentioned, there's all those threats and all those signatures, and every one of those signatures needs to have an alarm that can be generated. So if one of those signatures or anomalies is detected, you get an alarm that goes off, and you can be alerted. So an admin can be alerted via an SMS message, for example, or by an email. So for every signature, there's got to be an alarm. And once again, very often these alarms can be customized. You can adjust the thresholds. So maybe or you can even disable some alarms if you don't consider it a threat. Depending on the configured threshold, the alarms can be triggered by signature analysis, spectrum analysis, behavior analysis, or even performance analysis. Any best of breed WIP solution for each alarm needs to have detailed descriptions of the attacks or vulnerabilities that triggered that alarm. So yeah, I see a lot of WIP solutions that, they'll have an alarm for a rogue AP and maybe 2 or 3 other things, but then there's no description. So a good best of breed solution will have for every alarm a detailed description of the attacks and vulnerabilities that triggered that alarm. And that alarm database should also include suggestions on how to investigate the said vulnerability or attack and how to mitigate that. And so any good as I said, best of breed WIPs will have all this in their database. The biggest problem with WIP solutions in the past has been false positives. So you get false positives, and that's why sometimes you need to tweak the thresholds and some of the signatures and threats and alarms so that you don't get false positives. But, false positives are becoming less and less and less. And one of the reasons they're getting less and less and less, cloud. As we move WIPs to the cloud, once again, we can look at anomalies. We can look at a lot more data than we could at just one customer site. And by doing that, we can cut down on the number of false positives on any WIP solution. In the news recently, you've probably heard about the latest version of iOS. They've done more randomized MAC detection. The whole purpose behind that is to offer more privacy to end users, but it can also wreak havoc sometimes in your deployment, especially captive web portals. With our WIP solution, we can absolutely detect MAC randomization for iPhones or Android devices. That's going to be pretty important moving forward, especially as Apple and Google and others start making MAC randomization even more complex. It could start causing us more problems, and maybe we might eventually start tying in this detection of this into our NAC solutions to maybe help with some of the problems that are, there's pros and cons to this. You have better privacy, but it can also cause deployment issues. So we can detect MAC randomization and any kind of MAC spoofing, by the way. But one of the main topics I really wanted to relay to everybody in this webinar is yeah, all these old threats I've been talking about, they've been around and they continue to be around, but there's a whole new one, and that's IoT. I like to call IoT the new security frontier for wired and wireless. But let's just talk about Wi-Fi right now. There are tons of Wi-Fi IoT devices now that are new entry points into your network, okay? And I'm not just talking about home like this Nest right here. It could be in healthcare. There's lots of patient monitoring equipment that have Wi-Fi radios in them. And in a lot of cases, these IoT devices don't have really good security. Very often they're not even using 8 or 2.1x or any security at all. So these are all potential holes into your network. I'm sure everybody's heard about an attack that happened in Las Vegas a few years back where they hacked through, I think it was an IoT thermometer, Wi-Fi thermometer that was in an aquarium at a casino, and then they were able to get through that and get into the network and get into the database of all the high roller gamblers of that casino. That got a lot of press in the media. IoT devices are growing exponential, Wi-Fi ones, and they need to be locked down and they need to be monitored because now they are all potential sources of entry, wireless entry into your network, okay? And speaking of IoT, I'm proud to announce that we are now no longer our WIPS solution. Air Defense is no longer just a solution for Wi-Fi security monitoring. There's IoTs and other RF technologies, and there's a lot of it in Bluetooth and BLE devices. Right now, there's like 4 billion BLE enabled devices, and that's projected to go up double or triple in the next couple of years. So we've built in some of the 8 or 9 BLE attacks that are known and out there right now on IoT devices. We monitor for that now in our WIPS solution. So WIPS solutions need to be monitoring for IoT attacks and not just Wi-Fi IoT attacks, also BLE and possibly other technologies in the future. So you've probably heard by now that 6 gigahertz is coming. First the United States and then portions of it to Europe and other parts of the country, of the world, I should say. And we're all excited about this. I don't think in the enterprise, it's going to be much later in 2021, okay? And it will be a good thing. We'll have all this great new spectrum space. But I will say this, always remember the 15 billion Wi-Fi devices that are out there will never be able to connect to the 6 gigahertz radios. So please understand that. That being said, we're all very, very excited about 6 gigahertz. And we'll have to learn new deployment strategies for 6 gigahertz. We'll also have to learn new security strategies as well. So I want you to think about this. Maybe you don't, maybe people start putting in 6 gigahertz rogue APs into your network a year from now, okay? That they've bought, once again, it's an employee doing it, and they've plugged something in that they bought at the store from Target or whatever. You might have a great WIP solution, but guess what? It's going to go undetected. And that's because your sensors don't have 6 gigahertz radios. So we're going to have to rethink that moving forward. We're not going to be just monitoring 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. Moving forward in future years, we're also going to have to monitor the 6 gigahertz frequency band. Which brings me to cloud management, WIPS via cloud management. Where WIPS is going to, I think, have a renaissance in the coming years is that it's moving to the cloud. The management solutions are moving towards the cloud, the cloudification of WIPS. And why that's good is for a couple of reasons. Now you can have a global WIPS security monitoring solution. A lot of the WIPS solutions right now could just monitor one site. With a cloud WIPS monitoring solution, you can monitor solutions for your entire enterprise company all over the world. Additionally, it can be used for both wired and wireless monitoring capabilities because most cloud solutions are both wired and wireless. But where it really gets good is this. And I know it's an overused buzz term, machine learning, but because of all the data that we take in every day and collect, you can have more accurate algorithms, threat assessment, and anomaly detection via machine learning, okay? The amount of data we take into our cloud management solution, Extreme Cloud IQ, is mind-boggling. is 1 terabyte of data per second. And we can look at your data as well as other customers' data, all anonymized, okay, but run algorithms on that. And that's where you're going to see a lot of the threat detection and anomaly detection be greatly enhanced, quicker, better, and also less false positives. So when I came over to Extreme Networks about a year ago, I came over with the Airhive Networks acquisition that brought cloud to Extreme Networks. And I was very, very pleased to learn and be reminded that Extreme Networks had the best of breed wireless solution, WIPS solution right here already, and that's Air Defense. I've worked for Air Defense in the early days of Wi-Fi. I did a bunch of work with them when they were a standalone company. And I used to joke at Aerohive about how I wish we had Air Defense in our portfolio. So instead, Extreme bought us, and now we're all on the same team. So I'm very excited about it because there is not a better WIP solution out there. And here's some really exciting news. The really exciting news is we're cloudifying it. We still have our standalone Air Defense solution, Air Defense Enterprise, that is still best of breed and still a lot of our customers are using, but we're also moving it towards the cloud. And to start with, if you have a cloud account now, you will notice that you have the availability right now of what's called Air Defense Essentials, where we've already brought some of the capabilities of Air Defense to the cloud. With I think by the end of the year, we're going to have 60 threat signatures right off the bat in Extreme Cloud IQ with Air Defense Essentials, and that's way more than any of our competitors. And here's the cool thing: no extra cost for this. So for the Air Defense Essentials, it comes standard with your standard Extreme Cloud IQ pilot license. I want you to stay tuned. You'll be hearing more from me and others. There'll be more announcements and more cool things coming in the coming months and coming year in terms of the cloudification of Extreme, the cloudification of Air Defense in Extreme Cloud IQ. So let's draw a few conclusions right here based on this fun webinar, and I hope you've had fun. Number one, both dual 5 gigahertz capabilities where you can turn that software selectable radio into a full-time sensor, or third radio APs are going to make WIPS, number one, more effective because you're going to have full-time monitors again, and not these part-time monitors, which is the sleeping security guard, and more affordable. It's going to make WIPS affordable again. Because you don't have the extra hardware cost and you don't also have the extra installation and man-hour cost. WIPS is more important than ever. The existing threats are still out there. The rogue AP is still something that should make you scream, okay? And you should be very worried about. That being said, there's new threats because there's these new hundreds of thousands or millions, I say, of potential entry points in your network due to IoT. Okay, IoT is going to make our life a lot easier, but it's also going to make it more complex if we don't lock these things down, because they're all potential entry points into your network. And that's why IoT discovery and monitoring, including Bluetooth and BLE, is going to be important in any good WIPS solution. And you know what? Cloudification is going to make WIPS more scalable. And what I forgot to mention earlier is more affordable too. I think you'll see the price point. I think I did mention it. WIPS is, number one, it'll be global, easier to manage a WIPS solution globally via the cloud. And it's going to make it more affordable as well, as opposed to having multiple management licenses across different locations. So I think you'll see WIPS become a lot more affordable than a lot of the standalone solutions have been in the past. And finally, as I mentioned before, machine learning that cloud offers is going to enhance your anomaly detection and threat assessment greatly. And that's where we're really going to see a lot of value in the coming years with WIPS. And so I really like to believe that WIPS should no longer be an RFP checkbox. If that's what you're thinking of WIPS, if you just think, oh yeah, they got a WIPS solution too, when you're making your decision on what you're going to purchase, and you're just going, okay, they got one too, just do me a favor, compare the other guys to us, okay? Because we take WIPS a lot, I think, very seriously, and so should you, because of all the things I've outlined in this presentation. With that, I would like to get a couple of shameless plugs in real quick. I'm currently in the process. I've written multiple Dummies booklets for marketing purposes here at Extreme Networks. There's a couple of them that I've either written or tech edited on this slide, but I got a new one coming in early 2021. The title might change, but right now we're calling it Cloud Managed WIPS for Dummies. So keep an eye out for that, and we'll make that available for free via our website early next year. So I hope you will download that when it becomes available, and we'll announce it, obviously. And another shameless plug is my main book that I co-author for about 16 years, the 6th edition of the Certified Wireless Study Guide for network administrators, is now available for pre-order. It is also coming out early next year, but you can order it on Amazon, and it's considered the #1 reference Wi-Fi guide in the world. So if you're interested in buying a copy, thank you. I'll make $1. So with that, got the shameless plugs in, talked a lot about WIPS. I think we got about 5 minutes for questions. So Mitch, what do we got?
Thank you, David. We'll go ahead and take some time for questions now. Just as a reminder, please be sure to type your questions using the Q&A window on your screen. So the first question we have is, what verticals do you think should spend the extra money to deploy WIPS?
Could you repeat the question one more time?
Sure. The question is, what verticals do you think should spend the extra money to deploy WIPS?
Okay, good question. The question was, are there any particular verticals that should spend the extra money for WIPS? So in my mind, everybody should spend the money. And I'll kind of go back. It's not going to be extra money moving forward. If you start, as we start moving towards cloudification, that'll basically, you'll be integrating your WIPS solution into the cloud. So that will make it a more cost-effective solution. And number two, with the advent of either using a software selectable radio as a sensor or using third radios as full-time sensors, there's no longer really the need for the overlay sensors, and you can still have the full-time monitoring. So with that, I think everybody should spend the money for WIPS and should be taking it more seriously. That being said, traditionally, some verticals have taken it more seriously than others. Number one, big box retailers have always been willing to pay for the overlay solutions. We think moving forward to the cloud, it'll make it easier and even more affordable for these for that vertical as well. Same thing with healthcare. Healthcare is probably the first one that comes to my mind, especially with all the IoT devices. If you're in healthcare, you need to be taking WIPS security extremely seriously, and it needs to be part of your strategy, a big component of your wireless security strategy. Federal government too, and even state government, but really it's any vertical, but the 3 or 4 I just mentioned are probably, a lot of it has to do with the value of what you're trying to protect. So also the finance industry would be another one, the banking and finance industries. But look, if you're worried about it, I mean, you should always be worried about security, even at your home for that matter. So I'm not saying you have to buy a WIPS solution for your house, but if you're a business, you should at least have some level of WIPS security.
Perfect. And the next question we have here is, am I forced to use the cloud with Air Defense? Is Extreme going to kill the standalone version of Air Defense?
Okay, so if I understand the question is, are we going to kill the existing Air Defense Enterprise, which is a standalone, full-blown best breed WIPS solution that's been around for almost 20 years now? The answer is no. Okay, it's still going to stay around. We still have a lot of customers using. We are moving a lot of the components to the cloud. So there will be options, okay? We started off with Air Defense Essentials to the cloud. You will see more things added to the cloud, but we are not going to force anybody to turn off their existing Air Defense solution and go to the cloud. We want you to go to the cloud. And at the end of the day, you're going to want to go to the cloud because WIPS is going to get better. So if you're not on the cloud now, it's not a matter of if, it's more a matter of when. But we have some customers that are happy with their existing Air Defense solution, and we will absolutely protect them.
Perfect. The next question we have is, does Air Defense detect WPA3 clients and APs?
Good question. So if you haven't heard, WPA3 is the new wireless security from the Wi-Fi certification from the Wi-Fi Alliance. There's not a lot of tactical deployments of the technology right yet now because a lot of clients just don't support it or don't have the firmware updates for it. The bulk of them, I would say. That being said, part of the Wi-Fi 6 certification, which is 802.11ax, mandates WPA3. Okay, so WPA3 security will start growing. So as I mentioned in the thing, any best of breed WIPS should also do classification for authorized devices, including WPA3. And we absolutely do that. And also for another security protocol that's will be mandated in 6 gigahertz. So there will no longer be open networks. It's called OWE security. Opportunistic wireless encryption. So that's coming as well. And it is part of air defense.
Perfect. And we are running out of time, so that's going to conclude today's session. There were a lot of questions asked, so we'll make sure that we have somebody contact you directly to get those questions answered. And thank you again for your time in participating in today's webinar. You'll receive our follow-up email within the next 24 hours with a link to the on-demand recording. Thank you and have a great day.